so I've worked for Forest View Psychiatric Hospital, I think some of you know. Yeah, for 3 years, and then I joined the Bethany Christian Services and started this program called the Healing Center. The actual name is Refugee Center for Healing Torture Trauma. And so my presentation, it's supposed to be focused on the youth, but I want to give you a context of where the youths are coming from and what the ideal could have been if the youths were coming from a situation which would refer to as normal. And my focus will be on trauma and how it affects them and how they come across providers. Most of the people I've worked with have been displaced. And so it was in the context of providing relief counseling or just doing relief work to help the displaced people get comfortable wherever they were. And so I've visited camps, in Middle East they don't have refugee camps. I don't know if you know that. In the Middle East they don't have refugee camps. People are allowed to stay in communities for fear of raids. And some countries are not party to the treaty that allows for you to keep refugees, like Thailand. Thailand is not a signatory to the act. So they are not compelled to keep refugees. These things you should know. That's why some people come from countries where they were in jail all the time because those people did not agree with the United Nations that they can keep the refugees. And so let's get going here. This is just a quote because I did some research and there are some references at the end. Trauma corrects the meaning of life, while culture gives meaning to life. We all live with values, we all have a culture, and we enjoy that culture, even though we don't like some of the values we espouse. But when trauma strikes, it makes you feel like you don't have a life, somebody else has to guide you. So as we deal with this, as providers, we should be curious in knowing their background and be respectful. This is almost what Lucas was talking about, cultural humility. And we should be interested in knowing socioeconomic background of the client. It is very tempting for us to think that refugees come here as ignorant people. Immigrants or refugees are not ignorant per se. Some of them were medical doctors where they're coming from, very smart. But they come here, they cannot use those credentials because they have to be licensed in the United States. And so we should approach them with respect and be curious to know what they are doing in the past. I don't want to talk about me because I was meant to go through the basic English classes. Every 2 weeks, Lucas, they make me go to another level. Oh, so you can do this? Oh, so you can do this? Okay. That's because my educational background is British. And so I spoke with this British accent. I wrote the British English, which did not make sense. Now you can imagine a person who's coming from a French-speaking country, or Portuguese, like in the Southern Africa. It's very difficult for them to assimilate quickly. So the stigma associated with mental health, I'm just laying ground here, is synonymous with insanity. This is reinforced by ethnic community members. In Africa, generally speaking, mental health is associated with insanity. The word you use, mad, I'm mad with you. In the English context of British English, is insanity. So you see the contrast there. So most of the people view this with suspicion because how can somebody start having bad dreams in the night and continuously? Somebody must have played magic on them. That's the way they look at things. And then, what I mean by being reinforced by community members, if they see you going for counseling, then they'll say, oh, come. What's going on here? Did you lose your mind? That's the way they look at things. Cultural issues to be aware of may include making sure you understand the client's traditional view of therapy, reframing the difference and meaning of therapy between treatments, provider and client. What is therapy? All they want is you to tell them what to do. This is a strange environment. What is therapy? Because therapy per se is done within the family context, or extended family context, or a community where there are elders. Those people will sit you down and say you are out of line. So to go to a stranger and disclose your feelings, or talk about how you feel, how strange you feel, is taboo. So clearly explain to the client before, and don't even give them a label. Do not diagnose them. It's always good for them to lead themselves into a diagnosis. So you feel like they describe. And since you are not sleeping so much, this may mean what to you. They have words for it, but in their own context. And that's when you say, here we refer to that as depressions. The symptoms we've talked about seem to point in this direction. You're still not diagnosing them. They don't want to walk away with a label because they won't come back. And so that's why clients do not want to engage in therapy, because they fear that label. They fear stigmatization from their own community, and sometimes they feel they're betraying their own community, because if an African from my country goes to seek therapy, then people from my country will be concerned. Are we now starting having people becoming insane from our country? Does it mean we don't have wise people who can sit them down? So it's like you're betraying your own ethnic group. Now, affect modulation, which you all may know, is just a description of your feelings. Identify, express, point to the feelings. You cannot do that to a stranger. And so you see kids shutting down because that's not what they're used to. Okay. If you know the journey of immigrants do not, especially refugees, do not come from their countries of origin into the US. Sometimes they pass through 2-3 different countries which host them as refugees. And now you can imagine we deal with kids who were born in a camp in the third country of their transition. What values will they espouse? Will they espouse the same values as their parents? Any response? What would you guess? Or what values would they espouse? It's a camp. It's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
The values of the people around them?
Yes.
Yeah. Whatever helps them to survive the circumstances.
Exactly. That's what I'm looking for. They're looking for whatever will help them to survive. Because not all of them have parents with them. Not all of them have family. Or if they do, they're no adults. Maybe they just survived as siblings. So the culture they will walk away with from the camp is what they see around. And what do they see around? Lawlessness. Where they're coming from, where the parents are coming from, there are 2 levels of law enforcement. There's what they call customary law, which is done at the village level. The headman will adjudicate. They will resolve the conflict with the different parties. And then there is state law, which is regulated by parliament. So that's why they get so confused. Why did you stop me because I'm drunk? Why? Because the environment they're coming from, that is customary law, which takes care of it. They'll just call them and say, oh, okay, your conduct over the weekend was very bad. You have to compensate. Because of your conduct, it resulted in this and that, or loss or damage to somebody's property, and so you will have to compensate that somebody. So that's the way they look at it. And drinking is no big issue. Okay, so I'm talking about typical life in Africa. I'm not talking about the city. Because the people we are talking about were not born in the city for the most part, but their parents were, or could have been born in the city. Okay? So you want to know the crude part of it, which is crucial to your interaction with them, and that's what I'm trying to explain. So because of this, children espousing mixed values in the host or resettlement countries, it creates, some strain on the relationship between parents. And it also creates an expectation crisis, because I had my own problems, and yet I came from an affluent background. But I had my own problems. To get my children sagging their pants here was unacceptable. Now you can imagine a helpless parent from a refugee background who used to be a medical doctor. They feel like they have lost control. Okay? And so the relationship between children and their parents is just not there. It's like the children are already rebelling. It took me like 3-4 years, Lucas, for me to accept that, because I could take my kids to the school, and then I realized I forgot the science textbook. I drove back, and I talked to the vice principal. Why? I want to give this book to my son. Oh, we can give it to him. I said, no, I want to see him. They paged it, And he came. When he was with me in the car, the pants were here. Now he comes to grab that book, and the pants were, and he didn't know Dad was there. So I cannot change those things. That's what they have come to learn. And that creates problems for parents. Now, you are dealing, for the most part, with kids that may not have grown up with parents to guide them. And so they are orphans, where the conflict has been worst. Like the Congo, you get a lot of kids who have never known a family structure or any structure of leadership. All they know is survival skills. I lived through the worst times in my life with my brother. Who are you to instruct me what to do? First of all, why should I trust you? Why should I? When they come from whatever situation into the US, their expectation is, as soon as they land, this is a country of milk and honey. Money is grown on the trees, everything is so easy. But then they are met with cultural shock in the first place. And then things are so methodical, there are so many procedures. They're not used to that. Just line up, get the rations for the day. Eat, forget. So there's a lot of things that they have to learn here, and you're bothering them? What are you telling them? You're not their father? Okay, so when you're talking about safety with these young people, let them define what safety means to them. Start from what they know, and then introduce them to what safety means in this environment. If you are just going to impose on them, you'll never get through with them. You will never get anywhere with them. Let them define what safety means, because they have seen what it means to be vulnerable in the worst of times. When I'm dealing with young people, I have a different posture altogether. I have a different approach altogether. It's upbeat. Kids don't want you to be sluggish when you're interacting with them. They want to see some energy in you. They want to see some interest in you. And when I'm with the elders, like somebody said, flexibility, I have to be appropriate in my approach. For kids, 30, 40 minutes is enough for therapy. Otherwise, their attention span is gone. You want to capture their attention and speak to them or interact with them in a meaningful way that they'll gain. Because if you go very slow, they'll lose interest. At the end of it all, they will not gain anything. They'll disengage. There must be an assurance. This is very important. And you have to explain it very slowly. I know you've been betrayed before, maybe, I don't know, but I want you to know that by law, I'm not supposed to disclose whatever we talk about here. If there's an interpreter, you also refer to them. They are not allowed to talk about this either. So you can disclose as much as you're comfortable with. Okay? Would you trust me? It's up to you. If you have to benefit, you have to trust me. So you can tell me what the information that would be useful for me to help. You got to be, sensitive to their case management needs, because you may be in a hurry to help them reduce their psychological symptoms, but their priorities are not there. They want something physical, so you should be sensitive to what they are pointing to as their interests. Their priorities. Now, gender equality. I want to explain this very carefully. Chini talked about gender roles. The young African males have a problem respecting women. Okay? They just put it as it is. They have a problem, especially if you are younger. They look at things differently. Okay? They have a problem with fathers if they are orphans. Because the father is supposed to be a protector in a cultural context. Okay, so let me just give you this scenario. These rebels come into the house because the man was associated with opposition party activities. He was rich, he was sponsoring the opposition. And then he runs through, out of the window, the wife is raped, the kids are beaten. In the African culture, for the most part, when you get married, the ceremony that is performed is to empower you, to show that you are a man and you're supposed to protect your family. So they'll give you an axe. You all know what an axe is? They're rarely used in this society. Axe? Axe? You know what it is? If you're not responsible, get worried. Axe. Okay? They won't give you a machete, it's axe. Now, usually axe is a defensive tool. It's a tool that you use to cut, which means you are defending somebody. Now, in modern day society, they'll give you a gun. In the absence of that, they'll give you a stick like those the policemen walk with. But bigger than that, I think it would be like a baseball bat. Those are symbols that you are the protector of the family. So when this guy ran out of the window, what impression did he leave behind? He failed to fulfill his role. And so when they came to the US, the family came earlier than him. Because, these people don't use the same routes. So they were, I think the international community was more sympathetic with this woman who had these 3 children, and they gave her way to come to the United States earlier than the husband. I think the husband went through another country. So when they met in Detroit, because they did not come as refugees, they came as asylum-seeking clients. There's a place called Freedom House in Detroit, where they do help people come in that way. And so he met with the family, and he wanted to be reconciled with the family, and the family refused. Okay? Because he did not live up to the expectations of our society. You are no longer a husband. And the kids said, you are no longer our dad. You understand that? It's very difficult to fathom that, eh? But that's the culture. You did not protect. So how do you claim to be a father? How do you claim to be a husband? So when they came here, they were asking for how to proceed with divorce. That's what brought that woman into my office. That's all. She didn't want a husband anymore. So what about a kid who's coming from that background? Will they respect a male provider? No. These are the people who walk out on their children. That's a problem. So these guys come from different backgrounds where they view us differently. That's why when they look at you, he has everything. Does he even understand where I'm coming from? He's telling me these strange things which I don't even understand. How helpful are these strange things? If it's in the doctor's office, I wanted to say what Jim was talking about, medical. People have been traumatized, don't like doctor's offices because of the structure. There are no windows. It feels like, oh my God, it's another torture chamber. Okay, and even those instruments just worsen it. Sometimes I go to Nancy Health to talk to those nurses, and sometimes to the training school, Michigan, they invite me to go and talk to them about these things, training doctors. These are the things that scare these people, kids or adults. So this is huge. I may not even finish what it entails, but I just wanted to show you an extreme example of why these kids have lost confidence. Remember, even law enforcement have played a part in betraying these people during the conflict. The case of Rwanda. Did you know that somebody could be taken to the hospital to see a doctor, and the doctor is just about to do the procedure, and then he gets a call from the rebels asking, do you have a Hutu? Do you have a Tutsi? And you say yes, and move away from the table. They'll come and slaughter that person. How do you trust the doctor then? They don't trust any structure. They don't trust any authority. So they're all going to deal with these issues which we've talked about before. I don't know if my father was killed, they'll tell me. If you're doing the psychosocial assessments. I'm not sure if my father was killed. I just know that he disappeared, that's all. It may sound simple and easy, but the feelings go deeper than what they're expressing. It's a loss at the end of the day. And they have no anchor in life, no attachment. They don't even know what to describe the relationship between them and their father. Sometimes they have this guilt of surviving what should have been their predicament as well. But why am I alive? Only to put up with all these strict rules in the US. Because what appeared to be a comfortable life now turns out to be very difficult to fit in. They have never seen peace. Peace is a relative thing. But to them it's even worse, because where they feel they'll be protected by the United Nations, in a camp, they are raped day and night. I don't know why this is allowed, but it's very difficult when you put up a camp. My own country has hosted thousands of refugees. The reason they don't put them in cities or near cities is fear of violence. Because the rebels will follow them into a foreign country and still strike. So do you think such a kid will like soldiers? No. Would they like the police? No, because the police watched helplessly without defending them. So there's no place on earth they can trust. There's no place on earth they will feel will be peaceful, but here. But it's not the place, it's the people. It has to start with you as a provider. How are you assuring them that it's safe to be here? It's safe to be here with me and with any other person who's going to provide for you. When we are doing assessments for these young people or older people, by the way, I deal with people from 8 to 70 ages. So I have kind of a fair understanding of the ages. There's what we call poly-victimization. We are familiar with that term, are we? Yeah. So in my program, we screen for torture trauma, not domestic, but torture trauma. Talk about torture trauma, there's strict, very strict screening tool which has been provided by ORR. Are we familiar with ORR, Office of Refugee Resettlement? It has to be strictly somebody who's passed through torture trauma experiences. Short of that, they do not qualify. But even when they meet that criteria, our tool does not capture other trauma situations the clients have passed through. And then we will be missing a point in addressing their situation. So I gave examples here. A youth or a child may have been trafficked, may have been tortured, may have been in prison. But all we are capturing is what? Torture. For them to fit into the program. And the treatment is not working because we're just looking at one part of their problem. We are forgetting that this presents its own problems, that presents its own problems, this its own dynamics. So those people you deal with have been poorly traumatized, including the trauma they face here, the cultural shock. Sometimes you get worried when people are too quiet. Is it making sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so providing education, psychoeducation in traumatic experiences and symptoms and treatment options. I know that most African cultures do not appreciate Western medicine because of the prolonged period you have to stay on it. They would rather deal with herbs. We don't use coins, but we deal with herbs. So most of the time it's steaming. They'll boil the leaves, and that steam which is coming out of the leaves, you cover yourself airtight, and the fever will go. As you sweat, the sweat is dripping off, and the fever will go, believe you me. Those are the things they believe in. But those things will not heal diabetes or high blood pressure. So you have to give them education about why certain things happen and why certain treatments are prolonged. Understanding traumatic experiences to them is it's a waste of time, it was a war, forget it, so what? Especially the older folks. It was a war, people have survived wars before. And I know that we cannot underrate their resilience. They are very resilient people. But at the same time, they've been affected. So if you explain it well, they may be willing to engage in therapy or whatever treatment. We'll talk about this. Now let me talk about PTSD. If you want to help your clients, because now we are having a lot of court-ordered clients from, can I say this? You give me permission? From your community and other communities. The communities from Asia and Africa are having a problem with the law because they cannot regulate their conduct in areas of taking alcohol. They're not being moderate. So we get a lot of court-ordered clients. We're just short of introducing a group so that we can have maybe some amount of success by dealing with a lot of people at the same time, because right now I'm working late in the night to cater for that population. But what am I talking about here? We need to talk about PTSD and how it relates to drug abuse. Because it's a coping skill, it's a coping mechanism when they drink. And they feel, okay, I'll just drink and forget. But that's a temporal kind of measure. And so we try to make that connection. At the same time, we go through the coping skills. We make the connection between, and all of us have been to school, the connection between therapy and medication, that in some cases it may work, therapy may work on its own, but it works better when combined with medication. So that should be explained very clearly. And also that Western medications are not full of poison. Because to them the side effects are like poison. I asked for treatment for this, what they gave me something else, and this is now resulting into this and that and that. They don't want all that. Okay, so sometimes we have the advantage of speaking languages that the client will speak, but it may have the downside, because some clients feel if I speak Swahili and I relate with Swahili community, then it's very difficult for me to keep confidentiality. I'm likely to talk about their issues. There are a lot of clients who invite me to their weddings or such gatherings, but I find it very difficult to attend fully, if not just drop off a check or something like that. Because it is like half the audience have seen you. And they stop dancing, they freeze. So what are you doing there? Disturbing them. Just walk out. There's a thing we can't just do when we know we are closely related to the, ethnic identity of the client. We can go to another one. I think I've also explained this. Go to the next one. Okay. Is this my water?